Members of Council, if I can please have you take your seats. Members, if you can please rise for the national anthem. Please remain standing, and during this time, remember the following persons who have passed away: the Honorable Michael Wilson, Sarah Leah Cohen, Maurice Isabel Coulter, Abbas Colia, Katerina Kate Lawson, Robert Parkhill, Jackie Shane, and Genevieve Francis Trez. Thank you. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. For the benefit of those who are connected to the Internet, the City Clerk has posted all of the agenda materials for today's meeting at toronto.ca/council. Members, we have two presentations this morning. The first is to recognize Reg Paul, General Manager of Long-Term Care Homes and Services, on his retirement from the City. I would like to call upon Deputy City Manager Juliana Carboni to come forward for the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity just to say a few words to recognize and thank a pretty long-standing and committed leader within the Toronto Public Service. After 30 years of exemplary service, Reg Paul, our General Manager of Long-Term Care Homes and Services, is retiring to enjoy more time with family and friends, do some traveling with his wife, and continue with his volunteer work. And I know that his wife, Helen, is with us today. And Helen, I just want to say thank you for sharing Reg with us and for supporting him throughout his career here at the City. You know, as General Manager, Reg has been instrumental in driving positive change across the division, always focused on improving the level of care and service to residents and creating a positive, supportive work environment for its staff. And because of his strong leadership, the City's long-term care home division is actually recognized within the industry and across the province as a leader in service excellence and in driving, innovative, groundbreaking approaches to support healthy aging. And Reg himself has actually received 2 provincial awards in recognition of his leadership and his many contributions to the long-term care sector. So, Reg, on behalf of all of us here today, our sincere and heartfelt thank you for all you've done and all you've contributed, for your unwavering commitment, integrity, and leadership in long-term care, in supporting the City, and in supporting the Toronto Public Service. And I think the Mayor has a...
Reg, if I can just add to the words of the Deputy City Manager by simply saying that I'm sure on behalf of all the members of City Council, past and present, that we concur in all of those remarks and in all of those commendations. And to say to you on my own behalf, I have been in many a long-term care facility across the province, going back to my days as Leader of the Opposition provincially and also now as the Mayor. And I think we can all be proud of the standard that we set in the long-term care residences that we operate at the City of Toronto. I know every time I go to one, and it really is regardless of how old it is. Some are newer and have been renovated under your leadership than others, but there is a standard of care and compassion, a physical plant that is as well kept as anything I've ever seen going across the province, regardless of who was operating it. And I think it's been a source of not only great pride to us, but of great satisfaction that we have set, I believe, what is the top standard. And I think that is what people expect of Toronto. It is what people would hope Toronto would do, and under your leadership, that's exactly what has been done. And so I want to say thank you. To me, a 30-year career is an amazing thing. I haven't stayed in one place for that long, and also the notion of retirement to me is a bit mystifying too. But having said all that, if that's what you want to do with Helen and you want to spend some time, then I commend you for that. And I just say on behalf of all of the elected representatives here and everybody, including the people in the city over time that have been served by the team that has operated under your leadership, thank you for a job very well done, for a standard very well set, and to give you every good wish on behalf of the members of City Council and all the people of the City of Toronto for your service. As you know, lest you should think that somebody else gets anything more, what we give you to mark this is this, which I hope nonetheless that it's only a plaque, but it is also something that I hope you take with the sincerity with which it is given, to say thank you, and that it can go in a proud place in your home, and so that your family can be reminded every day of the great public service that you rendered to the people of the City of Toronto. Thank you.
Mayor Tory, members of council, colleagues, friends, family, it's a true honor to have been a part of the Toronto Public Service all of these 30 years. A few years ago, when we were still known as Homes for the Aged, I received a letter from a family member who had inadvertently addressed the envelope, Homes for the Ages. And I thought, that's not a mistake, that is a prophetic statement. We are recognized as the City of Toronto Long-Term Care Homes and Services as leaders in excellence, with a true commitment for caring for those who are the most vulnerable in our society. I want to thank Mayor and members of Council for these many years, both past and present members of Council, for supporting long-term care homes and services. No leader can do this on their own. So I do want to acknowledge the tremendous team of individuals that I have been privileged to work with, managers and staff. You know, in our homes, we're 24/7. So no matter the weather, no matter the issues that are facing our world or our community, our staff are on the job, committed to providing service to the most vulnerable individuals in our society. I want to thank Juliana Carboni, our Deputy City Manager, for her unwavering support, as well as acknowledging my family, who did put up with sometimes long hours of work or having to put family and personal plans to the back burner while we were dealing with issues. But as I said, this is a true honor to have had this privilege of serving as part of the Toronto Public Service. And I want you to know that I will continue to cherish this time that I have had here with the city, and know that the division will continue to do great things on behalf of yourselves, but most importantly, serving the people directly that we do serve. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Our second presentation is to recognize the staff who responded to the recent fire at the Agincourt Recreation Centre. I would like to call upon Mayor Tory to make the presentation.
Madam Speaker, before I just begin that one, I should say that without trivializing the one that's to come or the one that preceded it, I want to acknowledge, as much as it may pain Councillor Matlow and I to do so, the excellence of a team that participated on behalf of the Toronto Public Service under the leadership of John Elvidge at a trivia contest at Witchwood Barns. And the politicians involved there, the odd couple of Mr. Matlow and myself, Councillor Matlow and myself, did mediocre, but they finished third, which I was a bit disappointed because I thought the people at this table knew everything and that therefore they should have finished first. But they did finish third and got several pounds of biscotti, which I viewed as a city asset. I have not seen it since that evening, but having said all that, I want to acknowledge their excellence, which won't surprise you, in that contest, which had dozens of tables, and thank Councillor Matlow for inviting me to that occasion, which was for a very good cause, on Open Door on St. Clair Avenue West. On a slightly more serious note, I think we're all amazed at the degree to which, when called upon, our public service responds in a way that is just so exemplary time after time after time. And there are big incidents and there are small incidents. And I think all of us were just horrified because we've all probably been at some time or another to the Agincourt community centre and seen what a beehive of activity it is constantly. You can almost go there any day of the week or any hour of the day and see people there doing just about everything that could possibly be done. And when we saw the pictures on television, there's nothing like, frankly, seeing a fire or one of these kinds of disasters of that kind happening to a place that you know to cause more bad feelings and more feelings of deep regret. But at the same time, I know, as does Councillor Karajanis, who was visiting, and in particular Councillor Lai, who was there repeatedly and continuously, what a fantastic job our first responders and city staff and others did to make sure that a bad situation was not much worse. And of course, that starts with safety, and it starts with the fact that there were people in that community centre, people literally in the swimming pool, which was the sort of focal point of the fire, that had to go out into the cold in their swimsuits and were cared for and looked after from that minute, and it included everybody else that was kept safe, including, to my knowledge, the firefighters were kept themselves safe, and the whole thing was miraculous in that regard, in terms of people not being at risk, or they were at risk but not injured or otherwise put in harm's way. And then it went on from there to what was a magnificent job actually fighting with a fire that was incredibly stubborn and difficult to fight, and the preservation of large parts of the building, and then all of the transitional arrangements that were made after that. And it was just one of those things where you saw the public service in its broadest sense responding to something that was a very difficult circumstance. And on-site city staff were the first to have to deal with it, and they acted swiftly to get people out. The building was evacuated safely, and I will say to them, thank you and congratulations. It shows how training is obviously very important. Then we had, of course, our firefighters and other responders, which included everybody, including the EMS and also the TTC, for example, who had buses there to serve as warming stations and otherwise help to deal with people. And it included everybody from the Water Service to the Office of Emergency Management, Strategic Communications, the police, of course, Facilities Management, the Fire Service I've mentioned, and our PF&R staff, in particular the staff from the Agincourt Community Recreation Centre. As I mentioned, In fact, now when you see the building in the aftermath, a large part of it actually was rendered relatively unharmed, which I think will be beneficial to the community going forward without presuming what's going to be finally determined as a result of the professionals looking at what can be salvaged and what needs to be done to restore this. And the arena, which of course would probably have been among the more difficult things to replace if we'd had to do so, looks like it might have been spared by this fire saving, except the compressor equipment. So that part was excellent, and then the other part that followed that was also excellent. I was amazed, I'm sure Councillor Lai would agree, that the PF&R staff then set about the complex task of taking every one of the programs, and I think I had a number that said there were 400 programs involving 3,000 different registrants, and finding a place where each of those programs could have a new home for what could be a lengthy period of time, regardless of what happens with refurbishing and renovating and repairing and replacing parts of this building. And they had a remarkable track record at doing that, and they did it in a way where most of the programs are going to be happening on the same day and at the same time, but just in a different place, which I think is actually quite remarkable. And so I want to say thank you to them for their leadership, and I want to say thank you to the other rec centres in the city that stepped forward. I think there were 3 at least that were major contributors. The Toronto District School Board helped with this, some of the schools in Scarborough, and I will say we got offers of help from, when I say as far away, from as far away as the city of Markham and the mayor and others there who said if they could help that they would. The centre is going to remain closed for the foreseeable future, but I think you should know I certainly had conversations the very same day when I was out there, as did Councillor Lai and Councillor Karygiannis, about the importance of moving ahead as quickly as we can to assess what needs to be done and then do it. So that we're looking not at what often can be a 5-year time horizon to get these things done, but a lot faster than that. I want to recognize Councillor Lai because she was there continuously to look after the needs of her residents. Councillor Karygiannis was there as well because I saw him there. And I just want to say that I think the proudest moments we would all have as elected representatives in this city are those moments when we see, whether it be an apartment building that has to be evacuated, whether it's a fire, or other things like this, some of the other tragedies that unfolded in the city last year, when we see our emergency people and our staff in the broadest context responding, and responding as professionally and as effectively as they do. And so I wanted to just ask, there are a number of the people who are involved in that, in all the different branches that I mentioned, who are here today, and I think they're mostly here, but I would ask those involved in any way, shape or form in this who are here with us to please stand up so that the Council can recognize your excellent and very hard work. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes?
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Speaker. A couple weeks ago, the Maple Leafs had a game out in the square, and it was pretty well received by their fans. They practiced out in Nathan Phillips Square. The team was dressed in full gear, took the subway down. It was quite something. Through that, we had an alumni game. City Council played some of the alumni for the Leafs, but the next day, Mike Williams approached me a few months back and asked me to put a team together and kind of GM this team. So the first thing I did was go and hire a coach. That was Mayor Tory. I don't know if he's going to be back next year, but we got it handed to by the second floor. So it was councillors on the second floor versus city staff. The other general manager was Mike Williams, and we got it handed to us. So I was concerned about our coach. I came down to the bench. At one time, the mayor had sent out 8 against their 4, and they still scored on us. So with that, the first inaugural game, I'd like to present this trophy. I was going to give it to Chris Murray, but he's probably embarrassed that his staff beat the councillor team. So it was our first inaugural second floor versus city staff shitty challenge. I'd like to present it to my colleague Mike Williams, the general manager from the other team. And we're looking forward to next year, but I didn't have a lot to work with. So next year, we'll start practicing, and we'll give this to you. So.
Thank you. Now, who was the goalie?
We brought a guy played just for the Leafs, and we still, that didn't help us.
Thank you. I will now call for a motion to confirm the minutes. Councillor Cressy, you have a motion on the minutes from the last meeting. Councillor Cressy?
Yes, Speaker. That City Council confirmed the minutes of Council from the meeting held on January 30th and 31st, 2019 in the form supplied to members.
All those in favor? Carried. I will now call upon the committee chairs to introduce the reports. The chairs can speak about the reports for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Bylaw.
Good morning, Madam Chair. That the report from meeting 2 of the Planning and Housing Committee listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes, you have a motion to introduce the Etobicoke York Community Council report.
Yes, I do, Madam Speaker, that the report from meeting 3 of the Etobicoke York Community Council listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak, you have a motion to introduce the North York Community Council report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, that the report from meeting 3 of the North York Community Council listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam
You have
Speaker.
a motion to introduce the Scarborough Community Council report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, that the report for meeting 3 of Scarborough Community Council listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Perch, you have a motion to introduce the Toronto and East York Community Council report.
Yes, I do. Good morning, Speaker. I move that the report from meeting 3 of the Toronto East York Community Council listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor McKelvey, you have a motion to introduce the new business from city officials.
Yes, Madam Speaker, that new business from city officials listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motions, recorded vote.
Councillor Ainsley, please.
The motion to introduce the reports carries unanimously, 21 in favor.
Are there any declarations of interest? Please indicate the committee, the item or motion number, and the nature of the interest. Okay. I will now call for petitions. Are there any petitions at this time? Okay, members, I will now review the order paper. The Mayor has not designated any key matters for this meeting. Members of Council, as today's meeting is scheduled for 1 day, I propose that we consider the member motion run through during the order paper review. I also propose that City Council set a time for a closed session if required for later in the meeting. The City Clerk has noted the items that members wish to hold. I will now go through the items listed on the order paper to take additional holds. I will recognize requests to make matters urgent and time-specific after I go through the items for additional holds. Once the order paper has been approved by Council, any change will need a 2/3 vote. Page 3. Councillor Holyday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just would like a recorded vote on EY 3.25, which is the request for attendance at a T-Lab.
EY 3, which one was it?
EY 3.25, request for attendance at a T-Lab.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks.
So on page 3, EY 3.25, Councillor Holyday is asking for recorded vote.
Councillor Perks and Councillor Perza, thank you. The item is adopted 22 to 1.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to put a hold on PH 2.6, providing certainty in the planning appeals process.
Thank you. Page 4. If you can clear the screen, please. Okay. Councillor Ford, page 4.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. I'd request 2 recorded votes on page 4, NY 3.26, application to remove a private tree, 18 Glen Allen Road.
Okay, on page 4, NY 3.26, recorded vote.
Councillor Robinson, Councillor Cole, Councillor Wong Tam, and Councillor Perruzza, please.
The item is adopted 21 to 3.
Councillor Ford, you had another one?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Next one would be NY 3.28, application to remove a private tree, 5 Vernsen Drive.
Okay, recorded vote.
Councillor Robinson and Councillor Perruzza, please.
The item is adopted 21 to 3.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Page 4, NY 3.1. I'd like to hold that for a very minor amendment. We could probably release that a little later in the morning.
So that's on NY 3.1?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, Speaker. Speaker, I'd like to ask for a recorded vote on SC 3.13, pedestrian cross protection review, Warden and Walben Road.
Okay. Recorded vote.
Councillor Robinson, please.
Councillor Matlow, please.
The item is adopted 19 to 6.
Page 5. Councillor Carroll, page 5.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Top of the page, SC 3.16. I'd like to hold that.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Page 6. Page 7. Okay, we're at page 8 now. We're doing the members' motions. Yes. Okay, MM 3.1. Okay, MM 3.1. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Etobicoke York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3.2. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. Hold. Okay, Councillor Holliday, you would like to hold? Councillor Cressy? I thought I heard you say that, Councillor. Okay. All right. MM 3.3. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Planning and Housing Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3.4. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Planning and Housing Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3.5. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the General Government and Licensing Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the hold? Okay. MM 3.6. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Economic and Community Development Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. Who said that? Okay. Deputy Mayor Wong. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. MM 3. Hold on. MM 3.7. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, Councillor Holliday is holding. Okay. MM 3.8. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Toronto and East York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3.9. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the North York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion relates to a local planning appeal tribunal hearing and has been deemed urgent. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item? Pardon? You would like to hold? Okay. Pardon? Yes. MM 3.10. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote to waive referral. MM 310.
Councillor Perruzza, thank you.
The motion to waive referral does not carry. The vote is 12 to 14.
MM 311. Notice if this motion has not been given, a two-thirds vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the Etobicoke York Community Council. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. All in favor of waiving notice? Carried. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, does the staff have it? Okay, we can put it on the screen. Oh, sorry, your mic, yeah.
I'll just read out for members of council. I'm just switching from the original motion, which is ward council in consultation with the chief planner, to chief planner and executive director of city plan in consultation with the ward council. Yeah.
Okay, on the amendment, on favor, carried. On the item, on favor, carried. Okay, now we do have 3 that we would like to add, and if we can do it at this time so the staff can circulate the motions. Councillor Cole?
Yes.
You have an urgent motion?
Yes.
I'll put it up for you, Mike.
Okay. Yes, I'd like to move the motion to, Madam Chair, I'd like to move the motion to look at, have staff look at setting up a ravine protection conservancy, and its urgency because the fact is that we have an imminent danger from the Norwegians that are taking over our ravines. So we have to stop the invasive species, and we need an analysis of setting up this conservancy.
All those in favor? Carried. Okay, Mayor Tory?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I have a motion to have City Council approve from our end the appointment of a jointly appointed chair of the Waterfront Corporation. There is a provision in the Waterfront Revitalization Act that allows for a chair who is not one of the appointees of the 3 governments to be appointed specifically as the chair. There's been an agreement reached between the 3 governments as to who that chair should be, and this motion allows for City Council to formally approve the appointment of Steve Diamond, and it's important that get done so that the 3 governments can put him into place, given all the discussions that are going on at that board.
Thank you. On favor? Carried. Councillor Grimes?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to introduce this motion for 101 to 137, the Queensway Local Planning Appeal. It's urgent because there's a 7-day LPAD hearing scheduled to commence April 15th, 2019.
On favor? Carried. Okay, that's it. I will now consider requests to make items urgent and time-specific. All those in favor of adopting the order paper? Carried. Members of council, I want to stress the importance of preparing your motions in advance. The clerk staff are here to help you prepare your motions. In particular, if you intend to move a motion during the release of holds, I will insist that your motion be prepared in advance and given to the clerk. If you do not have your motion ready, I will not recognize you, and I'm also reminding members that you must state your motion first before you speak to it. Members, City Council follows a routine for the processing and adding of any motions without notice during the meeting. Please remember that a motion without notice must include a reason for urgency. If you have an urgent motion without notice you wish to bring forward at this meeting, please give your motion to the City Clerk staff. They will prepare the necessary procedure motion for my review along with your motion. The Chair must agree the motion is urgent before you can seek leave to introduce it at this meeting. It will require 18 votes to add a motion without notice to the agenda during this meeting. Motions added to the agenda in this way are not subject to a vote to waive referral to a committee or agency. I will be reviewing all motions carefully, and I will advise Council after each recess which motion needs a motion to add to the agenda. Okay. We'll start on page 3, PH 2.4. Councillor Robinson. I believe that there's a presentation on this one. Okay. You can start.
Good morning, Madam Speaker, Mr. Mayor, and members of Council. I want to give you some background on item PH 2.4, which are the proposed amendments to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. The province has posted proposed amendments, and the city has a 45-day commenting period with which to provide the province our comments. I just want to emphasize this is a draft document that the province has posted, and this is part of the normal process of the city being able to provide comments. You will have received many communications by landowners as well and other interested parties, and all of that information kind of goes into the hopper and gets sent.
I'm sorry if you just put your time. Members of council, there's an awful lot of noise in here, and the staff are presenting their presentation. Please. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. As I was saying, you'll receive a lot of paper, staff report, and other comments and written submissions from landowners and other interested parties. All of that goes into the hopper and gets sent up to the province, as this is a provincial proposal that we're commenting on. What's in front of you from staff are two reports. The report that was prepared for Planning and Housing Committee that summarizes the implications of these proposed amendments, and then an additional report that we provided for you just yesterday. I do want to say that this has been a 45-day commenting period, 31 business days to get this together, including the initial report to P&H. So we've worked very hard to be able to put you in a position to give you some advice on these proposed amendments, understanding that it's in the province's purview to act as they see fit with amendments to the growth plan. I'm just going to highlight the report purpose, the policy framework that we work within, our recommendations and next steps, and then I'll join my colleagues and we can certainly answer any questions that you might have. As I indicated, they asked for this. They posted the amendment on the 15th of January. And our comments are due at the end of this week. Very short timeline. And I just want to emphasize that for Council, Council has made many decisions over the last 5 to 10 years about employment lands. And I think the whole context of our employment lands is essential to the livability and economy of the city. We've got over 1.5 million jobs in the city. And just over 400,000 of those jobs are in our employment lands. And Council has adopted many policies and taken many decisions over the years to sustain the growth of our employment areas, while balancing all of our other interests as we do in the official plan. The province stated their goals at the beginning of this process to streamline the planning process and remove barriers to increasing the region's housing supply. So they are looking at a degree of flexibility on some employment lands, which we principally want to make sure works in the City of Toronto context. A little bit of Planning 101 just quickly. I know that some of you have been around and some of you are new. So the context, certainly the city's official plan is our guiding document that was approved by the OMB in 2006. We did a municipal, what's important to understand about employment lands is that we did a municipal comprehensive review in 2013 that was adopted by council. We have also done further amendments to our OP to update it and make it current with current trends and the environment of the city. On the provincial side, there was a growth plan in 2006. It guides the regional growth and management of infrastructure across the region. It was updated in 2013 with new population and job targets. And our municipal comprehensive review, OPA 231, was an exercise to conform to that growth plan. Recently, the province in 2017 adopted a new growth plan, which we are in line to conform to. And then finally, the new government of Ontario has proposed Amendment 1, and that's what this report is all about, the amendment to the growth plan of 2017. The province has introduced a new concept for employment lands. They have introduced something called provincially significant employment zones. They've identified certain criteria that guide the choice of which employment areas would become provincially significant employment zones. And I list that criteria for you in the presentation. It's a new concept that essentially introduces a two-tier system and divides the employment lands into two groups. And this was used by the province to establish the draft plan amendment, the draft PZs. I'll refer to them as PZs or PZAs. This was used by the province to establish those, and staff have used them to make further recommendations. The mapping, and you'll see in the brown, those are the provincially proposed PZAs. This was shown in our PHC report, and we reported that we wanted to come back to you at City Council with further recommendations to add to the province's suggested PZAs. So what we've done on these maps is illustrate in the city's employment areas which ones the province has identified, which ones we'd like to add to. And let me just break this down for you quickly. The province started with identifying 67% of our employment areas as PZs. These offer status quo protections, which we know have been working to support and stabilize our employment areas. They are only subject to conversion at the time of a municipal comprehensive review. In our report to you from yesterday, we are recommending additional lands be added. So this adds up to approximately 95% of our employment areas. So it's really, in large part, a status quo recommendation that is consistent with Council's direction over the last several years. And importantly, we have used the provincial criteria to consider which lands need to be added. This leaves about 5% that would be subject to a one-time municipally initiated review before the next municipal comprehensive review kicks in. So what we've really done here is tried to limit the approach that the province has suggested, to limit the approach of having a two-tier system and reduce the amount of land that would ultimately be subject to consideration, at least, of earlier conversion. Another area that I just want to highlight for you, and you do see many of these reports as we bring through settlements on OPA 231 that have been happening over the last couple of years. We are still managing 84 appeals to OPA 231. They're at the LPAT. What we are recommending is that those appeals, and many of the letters that you see before you, we're recommending that those appeals continue to be processed through the OPA 231 process and really transitioned and be considered in the context of the earlier growth plan. This is really important to maintain the consistency of Council's previous position. We are also interested in or we have proposed a recommendation to you. It's our advice that office parks, which do include about 60,000 employees and other employment uses, they be maintained as areas, employment areas. The province's suggestion in the growth plan amendment is to exclude them from employment areas, but staff believe that there is no basis really to differentiate these office parks. They're important job creators, and we're quite concerned that residential land uses would outbid very quickly the residential uses in these, or the employment uses in those areas. Another quick point to emphasize is that the province's recommendations excluded the Ontario Food Terminal, and we know how important agri-food uses are in Toronto, the success of our one of our vitally important employment sectors, and that should be included. Finally, the major transit station areas. This is a concept that was introduced in the 2017 growth plan. The province's proposed amendment suggests that they be enlarged from 500-meter radius to an 800-meter radius. We believe this is more appropriate for areas outside of the City of Toronto. Given the urban fabric of the city, we think it's going to be challenging enough to manage the intensification that would be called for in the 500-meter radius, and we're recommending that we leave the MTSAs at the 500-meter radius, knowing that we have transit capacity issues, we have infrastructure issues. Balancing all of that, we believe, is challenging enough, and we would prefer to leave the guideline at 500 meters. There are finally other staff recommendations that are consistent with the planning approaches that the city has taken around requiring office replacement, setting minimum employment numbers through the use of zoning with conditions. Council has time and time again asked the province to approve conditional zoning powers. And also, as I noted, that matters in process that are under appeal should be transitioned so that they be considered under the rules that they were filed under. I do want to emphasize that we are recommending that we support a provincial proposal that unlocks the consideration of MTSAs from a municipal comprehensive review. In other words, allow us to do the MTSAs in tranches or batches so that we can get those done more efficiently and be able to update the OP and the zoning bylaw. The advice that we're giving you in this report, I appreciate, is coming at you pretty fast. I remember I did say that we've had very little time to do this. There has been, though, a real effort to maintain the city's position, and the thrust of the report is in keeping with the city's efforts to maintain the stability of employment areas. Over 400,000 jobs exist in our employment areas. They are vitally important to the economy. That approach, and I want to emphasize this, that approach is working. We're going to report to PHC at the next meeting on our annual employment survey. That is showing growth in our employment areas. That's showing over 5,500 new jobs in our employment areas. So the policy of stability and keeping speculation away from employment lands is working, and I think it's important for Council to express a clear, my advice is that Council express a clear position on this to the province of Ontario. The approach of introducing a second tier of consideration, we have tried to limit. We've gone from the 67-33% at Planning Committee that was initially proposed by the province. We are recommending that they modify that and go with really a 95-5. We should only be putting a very small number of lands into the hopper. This would allow us to undertake local area reviews in those areas and carefully consider how to maintain the jobs in those areas while considering whether or not conversion would be appropriate. Again, the effort is a bit consolidated here for you, and I appreciate its complexity and happy to answer any questions you've got. I do want to stress, though, that Council does need to make a decision on this matter at this meeting. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson, you held the item down. Question.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I guess I'm very happy to see this report and some of the recommendations. I guess I would like to ask the Chief Planner just about use compatibility and whether city planning will have the tools to protect the lands not designated during this one-time window through the PSEZ. I want to say PEZ, but probably not right.
Through the Speaker, the concept of land use compatibility is inherent in employment lands planning. Sorry, Councillor, I wasn't looking at you when I was answering the question. So the policy framework that we have in place, the regulations that the province uses through environmental legislation, none of that is proposed to change. So we would continue to utilize that toolkit to ensure that compatibility is reviewed when we're looking at it at the policy level, of course.
Okay, and you did a good job in your presentation, but if you could just maybe dumb it down a little bit on the impact it has on, I'll give an example in my new ward, Ward 15, Leaside Business Park. What is the impact of the creep on important business parks? What is the impact of, you cited this item to vulnerable to conversion pressures, whether they're residential, etc. So tell me a little bit about what the long-term impacts would be if this creep continues into these business parks.
Well, the issue of business parks is that we don't, our official plan as the policy is written and approved by Council and in front of the LPAT is that business parks are part of our employment areas, period, full stop. So those office parks employ 65,000 people. We all know the office market is changing and there's a great deal of demand for office uses in the City of Toronto. We want to strongly align it with our transit system and our future transit planning. It's important for ridership. Those parks also contain many other mixed employment uses. So in its totality, they're a big contributor to the health of our employment areas, and you know, a lot of them were built in the post-war era, and they represent you know, job factories really for a lot of our inner suburbs. So they're important to maintain.
Okay, and then I guess how would you, after today, and I'm hoping we're going to get a unanimous vote on this, but after today, how do we ensure the province incorporates your recommendations, which are excellent?
Good question.
Bit of a speculative question, perhaps, but
what other measures can we put in place? And
I think what we'll do is we have a very comprehensive comment. This is really a comprehensive comment that we're making back in their consultation, the province's consultation. We have continued to meet with provincial staff, and we will continue to meet with provincial staff. There are a lot of submissions here that we will work with provincial staff on to make sure that Council's advice to the province is taken seriously. I don't think the province wants to jeopardize the employment and business opportunity and the growth potential of the City of Toronto. I think that the housing agenda can be addressed pretty comprehensively by not going into wholesale conversion of our employment lands. We know that our housing needs can be met in our other areas of the city where we have other land use permissions that support growth. So we'll be taking that message very comprehensively with this report. And as we get more information on this through the consultation that we'll be undertaking, we'll bring that to the attention of the province.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to Chief Planner, and I really appreciate all the work that he's doing on the file. In my area, particularly in the development is called Global Fortune, is at Steeles and Kennedy. The map from the province shows the whole area between Kennedy to Midland, from Steeles to Finch is an employment area, and yet we passed through here updates and all that stuff. And I understand that there's a letter from the lawyer of the developer. I was just wondering if we can take that in consideration, or if you want a technical amendment to include that, or all the stuff that in the different areas that have been missed by the province, if this is going to be added in order to go up to the province and say, listen, you missed this, this is what we have done.
Yeah, so we're quite prepared. There are a number, as I indicated, there are a number of letters, like the Global Fortune letter, that identifies decisions that have been made through the OPA 231 process or other initiatives of the city. There are a number of areas, for example, where we took a regeneration area approach, which is what we did with that area that you're citing at Steeles. And part of the area has been changed to mixed use through that process that the city supported and was recently endorsed by the LPAT. So we'll be taking all of that, all those mapping changes and underlying site and area-specific policies that have emerged in the meantime, and we'll be providing that information to the province and be seeking clarity on which policies prevail, because we know that as we, and this gets very technical and I apologize, but we know that as we try to conform with the new growth plan, we will want to make sure that all of Council's recent decisions, where we have agreed to residential permissions, are incorporated in that exercise.
So I can then tell the folks that submitted this letter and written it to us that they can be rest assured that this will be taken into consideration when you present the report to the province.
That's correct.
One further question, if I may. There was some consideration by the province. I think they passed Bill 139 or 239, I can't remember the bill, that allowed intensification around GO stations or Metrolinx stations.
Yes.
How is that affecting us when you've got Metrolinx stations that are around areas that are industrial right now? I will refer to you as an example. In my part of the world, I have Global Fortune, which is at Steeles and Kennedy, and I do have another one which we're planning to build a smart track or a Metrolinx station at Finch and Kennedy. How would that bill, I believe it was 139, impact on those areas? And what are we looking to do in order to say, okay, in order to comply with that legislation, that we are going to allow to move forward to meet that criteria?
So through the Speaker, the city has approximately 160 of these MTSAs. They're called Major Transit Station Areas. Many of them, and they both have people and job targets in them. So depending on the kind of transit facility, the density of the people and job target may be different. For MTSAs that are in a mixed-use area, you're looking at an MTSA target that will deliver on people and jobs because those uses are permitted. For MTSAs that are in employment areas, the city's position is that the employment target be met, because we all know that you can get employment density near a major transit station area. So we want the underlying employment designation to prevail in an area that is an MTSA near a transit station. We know that transit ridership, based on office, for example, outperforms residential probably 2 to 1. We know that jobs need transit just as much as where people live. So you need to connect that. And the position that we've taken with the province and previously is that the densification around transit stations take into account the land use plan underlying the entire official plan.
Are you in a position at this time, and I know I only got about 30 seconds, to sort of project when we can take another regeneration? When will regenerations occur? You know, and I brought into this council specifically the 2 areas that I represent, and there's others that Tent City can happen. Can you project it that we're going to get to this in a year, 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years, or forget it, councilor is not coming at all?
That was your last question.
That would be considered on a citywide basis through the city's next municipal comprehensive review.
Thank you.
Which would be 2022.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. I just want to start by asking Mr. Williams, because we've dealt with this so many times in in a number of areas, but the impact, the importance of maintaining intact core employment zones in the City of Toronto from a jobs perspective.
So Greg's talked a lot about this already, but to sort of summarize key aspects of it, first of all, we have very low vacancy rate in industrial areas. So we're down in some areas of Toronto at 2%, which is the lowest we've ever had that in record that I know of in my career. So there's high demand. Greg talked about increased employment. So if we start to, but industrial and other job employers can only afford a certain amount for land. So other uses will always outcompete if those lands are made available. So
well,
retail
if
conversions.
they're made available for rezoning.
For rezoning.
That will have a spillover effect,
right.
Continual rollout to attempt to rezone, upzone all of it.
Right. So we lose land directly to the new use, but more importantly in some ways is it then creates a knock-on impact so that other adjacent lands also start converting because the tax burden goes up, the Ministry of Environment rules go up in terms of truck movements, noise, air impacts, etc. So this sort of contagion, as was used, a phrase used by the judge on Eastern Avenue, takes over and we lose the whole area. So we don't just lose one parcel, we end up losing the whole area.
So that's why we have to consider this very carefully, because even though one site might seem fine, it's not, it's the impact on the rest of the zone, not the one site.
Correct.
Thank you. And then I'm just going to ask Mr. Lintern, we have how many core employment zones? There's 16, I believe. Are there?
There's more than 16. I believe there's more than 16 in our official plan.
Core.
Yeah, I believe. Yes.
Okay, maybe you could look that up. I've always seen 16, so when I've seen those. Do we have any idea of the percent of land that's zoned for core employment in our city?
Well, I can express it from a jobs point of view that we have 428,000 people working in our employment area or employment areas that are designated in the official plan. I would say almost entirely all of those areas also have employment zoning that permits businesses to come and go and invest in everything that they do. So as a surrogate to the amount of total jobs, the city has over 1.5 million jobs, and you're looking at over 400,000 of those being in the actual employment areas. And that's really, really important because of the flexibility of zoning permission that's allowed in those employment areas that allows businesses to operate in an unfettered way where they don't have to worry about compatibility, they don't have to worry about traffic and parking. They can go about their business decision-making process without being interrupted by the potential for a conflicting land use.
Has anybody figured out the number of core employment zones yet?
8,000 hectares of employment areas of the city, which is 16% of the city's land area.
8,000 hectares.
Approximately.
So that's 8,000 hectares, that's about 16,000, 18,000 acres.
Yes.
Doesn't seem
2.2,
that
yeah.
big.
Holds 20.
Okay, I'm going to let everybody do their math and come back later. But if we compare that to the percentage of land for residential that's set aside for res, can we make that comparison here? Do you happen to know that number? That's a number I'd like to know.
Off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
I know there are 365,000 residential properties in the city. I'm trying to bring it up, and I
know.
I don't have it in my random access
memory. Not
memory.
on your hard drive that you have.
Not on my hard drive.
That was your last question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I note there isn't anyone still at the podium there. I'm going to be asking a question. I'm wondering if you can put the map back up of approved versus recommended versus not recommended employment zones. But first I'll ask the question about the 500 meters changing to 800 meters. And my questions are around what you will be presenting when you go to the province. Will you be presenting in person?
No, we'll, through the Speaker, we'll be presenting our staff report and any supporting material that we have to substantiate the positions that we've taken in the staff report.
So
we have been meeting in person, and we will continue to meet in person with provincial staff.
Oh, okay. So you have had some chances to back and forth. Have we looked at, so that we can present to them, what the development potential still is within the 500 meters that's there? I know that if you go out to Line 4, if you go out to Shepherd West and our latest extension, there's lots of potential inside the 500 meters. Do we have an overall look at that?
Well, through the Speaker, we are in the process of, as of the 2017 growth plan, we're in the process of undertaking that work. I can say pretty confidently we have about 160 of these in the city. Probably about half of them, at least half of them, already meet those density requirements.
So,
because
so
we
at
know,
least 50%.
like for example, there are MTSAs inside the Yonge and Eglinton Centre, and no one could dispute that they're not meeting their density targets. For example, we'll be focusing on areas where we have yet to achieve those density targets. And we have been busy, as you know, putting down planning frameworks across the city that describe for people the future vision for those local areas, working with communities, right? So whether it's an avenue, whether it's a mall site that happens to be near a new LRT station, like the Golden Mile is a good example. That's the exercise that we've been going through to actually visualize the potential for those areas. And through that process, meet the province's minimum jobs and people targets in their MTSAs.
So you can make the case that there's plenty of potential still there, and that we've got a good track record for realizing it when the applications come forward. I know that's certainly the case where I am. If I look at the map that you presented, employment areas that the province has not yet recommended be added, we're asking that they be added. What jumps out at me is all the employment lands leading to where the future DRL will be seem to be not recommended. If we've got transit plans in an area, don't you want a mix of residents and employment so that there's people on the train going both directions?
So for the Relief Line South segment, the areas are currently one of the areas is in the Dundas-Carlaw area, and it already permits a mix of uses. So it already has city policy in place that encourages both people living there and people working there. So that's why, for example, in that area, we have not recommended that, because that's already being well managed by our official plan.
But the ones that you are recommending being added, is that because those, how many of those were the subject of our last MCR?
All of those, through the Speaker, all of those were subject to the last MCR. Many of those are office parks, for example, and other areas. And as we know, and as we go about the process of deciding the route for the north segment of the relief line, all of those land use patterns and the growth potential in that area will be taken into account.
Exactly. And I'll use my last seconds to ask the selfish question. In my own ward, Consumers Road, we just spent a considerable amount of money on Consumers Next. The MCR allowed residential around the transit ribbon, Shepherd Avenue, and down Victoria Park, much to the consternation of the residents. If that is not protected, if that should not be made a part of this new growth policy, how fast do we lose the job growth we're experiencing there right now? American Express coming in, there's an office condo informal conversation going on a major plot. How soon do I lose that and it becomes residential if they don't recommend that for protection?
It's a very good, through the Speaker, a very good example of why we need to look at these land use patterns with our communities at the local level and lay out land use pattern that both provides for some growth and protects jobs. And we've done that with Consumers Next, and it's a great illustration of the approach that we'd like to take across the city.
Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair to the chief planner. The supplementary report gives us some very valuable information on the jobs that are actually in our employment areas. Am I right in understanding we're currently looking at about 417,000 jobs in the employment areas today?
That's correct, about 428,000.
428, wow, okay. And could you explain how, by asking the province if they'll listen to us, in making 95% of the employment areas in the city provincially significant employment zones, how that would actually protect those jobs?
Well, the cadence that we've established with our employment lands approach is to protect the employment areas, the stability of the employment areas over a longer period of time, so that they only come up for review when the city looks at the question comprehensively and citywide. And that allows businesses to decide that they're going to invest. And I would just use Sanofi Pasteur as an example up on Steeles, where they've invested $500 million in a new biotech production facility. They want to know that the land use isn't going to be pulled out from under their feet. I would want to know that too. So that's why it's vitally important to make sure that the city's regulatory approach provides that level of stability. And I think that's one of the reasons why the city has started to be successful with its policy framework to actually see job growth happen in its employment areas. So that stability and that cadence that we've established gives the decision-making process a much longer time to play out, and it gives the certainty that investors require.
So it's about stability and certainty. And since we discussed this at Planning and Housing, we're now coming forward, and I appreciate the tight timeline that you guys have been under. It's unbelievable turning around these recommendations. But we've now landed on 95% instead of 100%, or even in fact maybe 110% new ones. What was the rationale for landing on 95%?
So we had first looked at the province's recommendation from of 67% of our employment areas. We've increased that to 95%. We use the province's own criteria to make those decisions. Our advice is that we want to use what the province said the rule book should be to make sure that we're capturing accurately the areas, the employment areas of significance in the City of Toronto context. So we applied their criteria, including lands that are already designated in our official plan, and other criteria that they identified, including sensitivity to other land uses, the ability to attract new investment, and other criteria that the province put in place.
So just as it relates to the planning process and the growth plan and this sort of discussion, as a municipality, are we required to go through the provincials, the province's process? You mentioned we went through the provincial process, their lens. What about going through our own lens?
Well, I think we certainly bring our own view to it when we undertake our own municipal comprehensive review. So in this case, in this exercise, we've applied the provincial criteria, which are criteria, quite frankly, that we support and we find valuable. We, of course, would look at other City of Toronto considerations, including our entire official plan, when we undertake our next municipal comprehensive review, including, importantly, how much land do we have for housing? Because it's a two-sided coin. We need enough land to maintain our job, on track to reward our job target, and we need enough land to be on track to meet our housing target. And that's the balance that we are always trying to strike, and reviewing it consistently every 5 years puts us in a better position to achieve those targets.
So I noted on the west end of the city, when I was going through this, the proposed changes, we're talking about an agri-food network across the province. But I noticed the Toronto Food Terminal had not been identified as a provincially significant employment zone. Is that correct?
Originally, had not been our recommendation is that it be added. It could have been a mapping oversight on their part, I don't know, but council's previously taken a position that that be part of, that is land that is provincially significant. All of the purveyors of food that come into the city, many of them supporting our restaurants and other businesses, go in and come out via the food terminal.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Before we continue, I'd like to welcome the grade 5 students from Essex Junior Public School, located in Ward 11, University, Rosedale. Their local counselor is Counselor Mike Layton, and their group leader is Hannah Perotsky. Welcome. Counselor Perks.
Thank you very much. To the General Manager of Economic Development. We've heard that the residential uses are more valuable. Like, is it a little bit more valuable or a lot more valuable if your land is zoned residential?
A lot more. Well, it depends on the form of residential. Obviously, a high-rise condo, that land underneath it is worth a lot more than the land underneath a small single residential lot.
So if a residential permission is suddenly put on a land, the land increases in value if it was previously employment?
Correct.
So if we took the whole 33% of our current employment lands, I mean, is that, you know, in the aggregate, is that an upzoning in value of 100 million, a billion, billions?
Well, it's going to depend on how much the people paid for it. A lot of depends, but clearly in the billions and potentially in the tens of billions.
Sorry, I want to make sure I heard that. If the 33% number that was in the original provincial proposal were taken, this would be an upzoning in value in the billions and possibly the tens of billions of dollars.
Correct.
Wow. To the Chief Planner, we do municipal comprehensive reviews with some frequency.
The last one was considered by Council in 2013. We're awaiting its conclusion before we start the next one.
So what's holding up doing the next one?
We have the OPA 231 was appealed by a number of parties, over 100. We're down to 84. We have a 3-week hearing in the fall.
You have a 3-week hearing in the fall. So following that hearing, there will be another municipal comprehensive review due?
That's right. We'll commence it once we finish the process under the last round.
Okay. So sometime imminently, within a year, 2 years, we're going to be giving people who own these properties an opportunity to raise their concerns. We're going to do a planning exercise anyway.
That's correct.
So effectively, if there's a good planning case to be made that we don't need a given parcel as employment lands, that process already exists.
That's correct.
Okay. Given that process already exists and that a municipal comprehensive review, as you said in answer to a previous question, is not only against the criteria the province put out now, but against all additionally our OP policies, would you have any objection to us retaining 100% of the land at this point and considering any amendments when we do our MCR?
Well, through the chair, we put forward what we feel is an appropriate response to the provincial proposal, which is to significantly limit the two-tier strategy, the two-tier approach. We've looked carefully at the provincial criteria against our employment areas, and our advice is that we can manage the 5% that would not be provincially significant through local area planning studies, through tools that we've recommended as well to maintain jobs. So we're not throwing these areas out completely.
I understand. I was asking a slightly different question. If we want to go beyond what is simply the criteria the province have put in front of us and consider our employment lands with a full municipal comprehensive review and take into account the planning policies at the City of Toronto, I mean, we did this just, as you said, 6 years ago. Would you have any objection to us protecting 100% of the lands now and taking another look at it under the MCR?
That's the course that we were on until this amendment was undertaken. Given the short amount of time, I would not, but I'm trying to give you advice which is practical around the likely provincial direction.
Right. So, final question, I guess. Prior to the province coming up with this, did you or your planning staff feel any need to accelerate reviewing those 5% of lands?
I think the need that we are most concerned about is to get that LPAT hearing done that's in the fall. Because that then, honestly, many councillors come to us and speak about what about this piece, what about that piece. And quite frankly, there are some pieces of land out there that may be appropriate. So, I want to get on with the next exercise. And in that case, my priority would be getting
I got 10 seconds.
Sorry.
On the transit station piece, we don't, the City of Toronto is not in a position like some municipalities where we just want to give a blanket permission to increase the intensification around.
That was your last question.
We are not in, I'm sorry, could you restate the question?
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Perks.
Thank you. The other piece here is the MTSAs. Again, given that without the stuff from the province, did you feel any urgency to upzone around all of our transit stations?
No, through the Speaker, that is certainly a big work program item, and as I indicated, many of our MTSAs likely meet the density and job targets. However, that's something that we were embarking on, and we want to stay on that course. We're concerned that by enlarging the areas, we're going to make what is already a complex work program item a much more complex
Thank
item.
you. Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff, I'm focusing in on, I guess it's item 6 in the staff report, where we talk about job for job or applications and retaining space for employment uses. In practicality, how often do we see an intensive residential development retain any kind of historical job employment or creation that was on that site?
Through the Speaker, this is something that we've increasingly approached through our policy changes. So, for example, OPA 231 has an office replacement policy in it. Now, mind you, it's being contested. However, we have continued down that path since 2013 when we've done TO Core, when we've done Yonge and Eglinton, when we're looking at settlements, Celestica, for example, we're looking at office and job replacement planning approaches. So it's something that we've kind of changed course. Even recent settlements outside of our employment lands, we've very assertively tried to take the approach that in our mixed-use areas, we want to replace the jobs that new development is threatening. And we think fundamentally a mixed-use development in those areas is a much better planning approach in a complete community.
So in cases where an applicant wants to build a residential tower, a condo tower, on a site that was once a vibrant warehouse that's now have one security guard in there, there's no economic activity, would you go to the current existing employment numbers, or would you go to historical numbers, what were in there at one time?
Through the Speaker, I think we have to look at it through a number of lenses. You're looking at the land area. Employment lands is about land banking, letting trends come over the city, where a piece of land may have been a distribution warehouse with 20 employees. The next year it could be a different kind of distribution warehouse with 100 employees. That's something the city doesn't control. So that's why it's important for the city to be careful about the amount of land that it maintains for the flexibility that's needed for business trends to come and go.
Okay, on the more specific side, in your map, I'm trying to locate the Bombardier lands, which have recently changed hands. I realize this is more of a case study, but what would the new owners of the Bombardier lands have to do to be able to convert that from significant employment lands under what you're recommending into residential?
So those lands and other lands that are across the city, frankly, would be as Councillor Perks noted, up for review in the city's next municipal comprehensive review. And if something's happened in the meantime on a large piece of land, we'll obviously be having a conversation with those owners about the future of those areas.
I mean, could we not make the argument that anyone who purchased those lands knew they were designated employment and knew that conversion to residential would be, I don't want to say the word impossible, but very difficult?
Quite frankly, we met with all of the potential purchasers of the Bombardier lands, and we said just that to them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bailao.
Thank you. I just want to go over again the rationale that you used to have to 95. So, you know, why not 100%? Why 95?
I think through the Speaker...
Or 97, because in some parts of the report it says 97.
I think importantly, we looked at the provincial criteria. So the province embarked on this exercise of identifying provincially significant employment zones. First time actually in a while that province has got into the mapping business. Normally they leave that to the municipalities. So it's quite a change. Be careful what you wish for. In any event, the criteria that the province established, we said, okay, if that's the approach you want to take, we will apply that to the 33% that you didn't consider, and see if, reasonably speaking, some of it should also be included as PZs. And we came up with, actually, we should go farther. We should protect 95%.
So is it the idea to go to the province with the strongest argument possible to have as much included in there?
Absolutely. It's their rule book. We took their rule book back to them and said that's what we should use.
You feel that's the strongest argument
Absolutely.
that we have to protect?
Yes.
Now, so it would be important that nobody tinkers with that argument as well, right? That we don't start talking about sites or anything like that. It is important that we leave that argument. You have a strong argument, so it's really important that we take that argument to the province, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes. We have a strong case to be made. It's presented comprehensively in the report, and it's our advice, and has been our advice for the last 5 to 10 years at this council, to be very careful with land use conversions.
Okay. And this is unprecedented, but there's also something else that, part of your recommendations is have the 95, but you're not automatically saying that the other 4 or 5% should go. You're actually asking to have a study done by us, by the city, on these lands as well, because we haven't had really time to even evaluate this, in a prudent and responsible way, correct?
That's correct. The province has suggested that in their two-tier approach that there be a municipally initiated review of the areas that are not provincially significant. So our advice was, all right, if you want to go that way, we'll look at these 5% of these areas. We will, though, want to be able to have tools that maintain the jobs in those areas, because there are about 20,000 jobs in those areas. And we will want to look in these areas from a local area lens, involve local communities, and come up with our best advice. They won't automatically convert. It'll be dependent on the analysis, and you're quite correct, we have not had any time to do any of that work.
And it looks like the province hasn't either. They haven't even used their own criteria, for the love of God.
Right? I mean, certainly they're entitled to come up with growth plan amendments, but this is setting out a roadmap more than anything else. It's not making final decisions about anything.
Okay. So we're not letting anything go. We're actually showing the province that using their own criteria, they should be protecting 95. We're asking them to allow us to give them further information on the other 5, and we're asking them to reduce the 800 meters to 500 meters. Did I summarize your report correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Greg, on page, what are we here, 7, the report, I think my friend Councillor Patrick brought up on number 6, allow municipalities to acquire the applicant to retain space for employment uses where employment uses have previously existed or part of the development application where the municipality has in effect official plan policies indicating that they are under that redevelopment criteria, location size, use, phasing, development such as employment replacement policy would apply. And it goes on to say B, allow municipalities to also set minimum employment space thresholds for new. So that's for new. What about existing properties that we have in our control? And that's different. So I know on the Christie lands, for instance, I had a chance to meet with Mike Williams, whose job is to bring jobs to the area. And an applicant was looking to, they were looking to maybe do a mixed use. And I know Mike was very firm when we met with a number of applicants saying, oh, we want triple the amount of jobs that were there. And I think it was 600 and change were there when the bakery was in full existence. So Mike's saying, look, we want triple, we want a different type of use, probably platinum office. But what about the lands are under control? Okay, and now that would be under our control, where an applicant wants to maybe have a look at something. But what about Creteal? They have properties that we've put out here. We've had some major battles on this floor about protecting these. Is there any threshold for the type of jobs? So you're talking about job growth. Do we want just a warehouse to come in and 200 jobs? You mentioned 100 in a warehouse. What are we looking for? The land's under control for jobs. Is there some kind of formula per acre? What is that? Sorry, it's a long, rambling question, but...
Yeah, through the Speaker, certainly with Creatio, we can apply any business terms this council wants to apply.
Have we done that?
I think it's variable as to what council has decided it wants to do with its own lands. But let me answer the question through a planning lens. What we've done with OPA 231, and again, it's the office replacement policy of 231, which is under appeal. But what we've tried to do on applications since then, and been quite successful, is for anybody who has an office building that's greater than 1,000 square meters on the lands today, we seek its replacement. So that's the approach that we've been taking since that office replacement policy got adopted, and I wouldn't think that we would impose on ourselves anything different than what we impose on the private sector.
So there's no, we don't really care what employment goes on what size of property.
Basically
Are we out? I know Councillor Thompson took the lead on this, and he's traveled the world and trying to create, new investments. And continues. And I've traveled with him, but to attract new investment, what are we looking? Are we looking for high tech? Are we just looking for that trucking warehouse? Are we looking for a marijuana grow up, or has maybe a security guard like Councillor Pasternak said? Are we looking to? Maybe this is a question for Mike Williams. I'm not too sure. Are we looking for? What are we looking for? We're just looking. If we don't care if it's jobs, we control the property. Let's put a warehouse in there. Let's put trucks in there, and we're good with the warehouse. Or are we looking for something different in the lands that we control?
I think it's a trade. Obviously it's a complex question, and you're talking about a specific situation. If I could generalize it away from the specific situation in your ward, ideally we want jobs that create exports to the rest of the world, because that's how to bring in new jobs, new wealth to the community. But we also always need support jobs, and so we need cement jobs, we need logistics jobs, we need all of those. But at the top of the pyramid of what we ideally want, it would be export jobs that create new wealth for the community.
So again, I know in lands we also control is where a developer may want to come in and want to change the use. We have great control in that, and we've had many conversations with people that come in to look to kick the tires in that, and you've been very firm on we want triple the amount of jobs that existed on this piece of property. Why are we not doing that with the land that the city owns? Why are we not? Why is there no criteria for that? It just kind of seems there's no direction on. We just it's employment. Let's put this in and let's go on to the next one. That seems to be.
These things are always situational. Depends upon what the market is at the time. Depends upon the valuation. Depends upon a lot of factors. And so I'm talking about the ideal situation, and we should coordinate. This is not part of this report, by the way. It'd be part of something else that we need to talk and take back. And Josie's not here right now, so it's under her world, those kind of directions. So I'd be more comfortable her having an opportunity to address that in this kind of forum.
Thank you. That was your last question. Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. Questions of the chief planner. So about the 5%, are they the areas, just want to make sure I understand this, they're the areas in green on the colored map?
That's correct.
And how and when did they get to be that designation or proposed designation?
Well, through the speaker, they're not a designation. All we're saying is that our advice back to the province is to, if you are going to take this two-tier approach, limit the amount of land that is subject to review prior to the next MCR to only 5% of our land. And we applied the provincial criteria that they used to ratchet up the amount that would be protected until the next MCR and limit this interim review to this 5% of land. I should emphasize, though, that there's still employment lands. There's still employment lands, and we would be in the report, and as I understand it with the growth plan amendment, we're seeking tools that ensure that as those lands get redeveloped potentially, that we maintain a job component on those lands.
So does our official plan not have to conform with the province's growth plan?
Ultimately, that's correct. Through the speaker, our official plan does have to conform, and we would after they adopt the growth plan amendment, let's say they adopt it by June the 1st, we'll embark on a conformity exercise with the new growth plan, and you will begin to see reports on that, likely all the way to zoning, completed by 2022.
So these green areas would not be part of the designation in the province's growth plan, if I got that correct?
Yes.
So how would we defend if there's a dispute, which I assume there would be because we know the land is worth a lot more for residential. So how would we defend, if we go along with this, with the green areas, how are we going to defend our current official plan policies when the growth statement treats these properties differently? It seems like we would have to conform with that rather than relying on our official plan to protect these lands.
So through the speaker, I would say that the new growth plan amendment will set down the rule book for how these non-PZ areas will be reviewed. And as we understand it, and again, this is a draft, but as we understand it, there are a few tests that will need to be met. One will be a municipally initiated review. A second will be tools to maintain a certain amount of employment. We, of course, and undertaking a local area study. So those tests will have to be met, and how we approach that for these areas will be, that'll be the process that we have to follow and apply our official plan and ultimately defend any choices that council makes around the potential conversion of those lands.
So it's your view that we still have a chance to protect that 5%?
Yes, in fact, the growth plan amendment that's proposed by the province is including policy directions that seek to maintain jobs in those employment areas. And we actually have a recommendation in our report that backs that up, that seeks conditional zoning power to actually enforce that policy direction.
Okay. Just another general question. I've never totally understood why the employment designation seems to only apply to industrial as opposed to office sites or at prime locations like Yonge and Shepherd.
Through the speaker, our employment area designation applies to both industrial and office parks. It applies to all of those areas. The office park verbiage is something that the province has introduced.
Not office park, but say employment, office employment at key spots such as the intersection of two subway lines at Yonge and Shepherd.
So through the speaker, the office permissions that may be required or permitted in those areas are under the mixed use designation, not employment area designation.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and through you to the Chief Planner. With respect to the language around requiring office replacement, I raised a question at the Planning and Housing Committee about perhaps making a technical amendment to include hotel replacement, knowing that hotels are also a very significant place of employment. They have multiplying effects that are economically felt, whether it's attracting large meetings, conventions, or just bolstering the tourism industry. Would you consider it a friendly amendment to make sure that some language is in there to include hotels?
Yes, we've previously considered this, and we could continue to pursue that council direction with the province, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And with respect to the provincial initiative here, what are the implications to those 84 appeals? If this goes ahead, what message do we send to LPAT, or does that make those 84 appeals just rendered dead in the water? Or sorry, you know, automatically successful?
Through the Speaker, we have specific recommendations that we've also spoken to the province about to make sure that any of those appeals are dealt with as transition matters. In other words, those appeals should be dealt with under the rules that exist now, not the new rules. So we want to inoculate those appeals from the implications of any new policy directions.
And that certainly makes sense from a legal framework. However, is there any way for them to retroactively roll it back? Not the appeals, but perhaps this legislation to sweep up those 84 appeals that are before LPAT.
I mean, that might be a question more appropriately answered by the city solicitor.
I think that is potentially a possibility, but sorry. It is potentially a possibility, but obviously we are requesting that they don't do that, to make life easier, that they transition them.
Okay, but unlikely. I mean, the ability to roll back legislation to capture those that are already in the appeal process, that would have to be. That's quite the political move, the political as well as legal move to do that.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, so that would be unlikely, but not impossible.
Not impossible. Yes.
Wow. Okay, and with respect to our own MCR process, obviously, you know, this is a very sophisticated city. We have a professional planning department. All of this is set out in motion. Has there ever been any type of political interference through the city's MCR process from the province?
Through the Speaker, my only comment on that would be that it's certainly the prerogative of the province of Ontario to change the planning rule book, the Planning Act, the Provincial Policy Statement, the Growth Plan. They have done that over the last 10 or 15 years, and I would assume that they will continue to do that to reflect the goals of the government that's elected.
But this particular move with the provincially sensitive employment zone areas, this is a relatively new instrument that they are proposing, never been done before.
That's correct.
So
this is a new approach, especially concerning introducing mapping. Right. Is something that we know at our level is a very difficult thing to manage, and usually expressed and manifest through an official plan document and land use designations. Carefully, very carefully. So it is that part of this change is a new innovation, I'd say.
So the cherry picking and granular interference with our own process and with respect to the employment zones, what would be the motivation for a provincial government to go into a city, go drilling right down into the various neighborhoods, and say, I'm going to change the zoning of that, or at least open the door to permit somebody, a property owner, to change that zoning? What would motivate a provincial government to do that?
Through the Speaker, I can't speculate on any, and I won't, on any political motivation. I do know, though, that their stated goals on the proposed amendments are to support a more streamlined planning process, to address barriers to increase housing, Also to promote jobs and housing near transit, and provide municipalities with increased autonomy and flexibility to determine context-appropriate growth strategies. So those are their stated goals, and I think what they're trying to do is, by introducing this two-tier approach, a batch of land, protected under the longer-term planning process, and some lands possibly available for conversion earlier. They, I assume, they're wanting to stimulate housing and development earlier through that approach.
Thank you. Councillor Bailao to speak.
This doesn't work.
Can you turn it off?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking staff. This was an incredible amount of work, both to produce the report.
Do you have a motion?
Yes, I do. Sorry. I would like to move staff recommendations and the supplementary report. And so I would like to, like I was saying, to thank staff. There was an incredible amount of work to produce a report so that at the committee we had an opportunity to have a discussion around this issue. And there was an important discussion. And again, we have a supplementary report. Things are moving really quickly. And once again, the City of Toronto has a very short period of time grappling with the information that is coming little by little, trying to understand what is dropped on your laps at the 11th hour. And so thank you, staff, for an incredible amount of work. We in the City of Toronto have a policy to protect employment lands, and there's a reason for that. We've actually been growing employment numbers in the City of Toronto. And obviously, it has been a set of policies and conditions and the great city that we have that contributed to that. But it is important that we don't erode our employment lands. And what we have here is a strong response. We understand that the Planning Act is an act of the province. We understand that. But we also understand what the city needs and the policies that have been working and the work that has been done years over years with the planning department. So what we're asking the province is for them to take a step back and using their own criteria, the criteria that they've established to get 67% of those lands, and without anything else, we're just using the arguments that they're using, we have proven that actually it applies to about 95% of those lands. The other thing we're asking is the other 5%, let's do a comprehensive look at these lands. Again, like the Chief Planner said, and we've done it here, the last municipal comprehensive review, sometimes, the city is a dynamic place. Sometimes it changes and it needs to be adapted, and we go through that exercise. But we go through that exercise with planning data, with good information, with numbers, with the background that our staff is able to give us. And so that's what they're requesting. The province, as well as the opportunity to work with the city on those 5%. And obviously, as the Chief Planner has said, to shorten the MTS stations to 500 meters. Madam Chair, I ask that we support staff recommendations. They have a rationale, and we shouldn't be tinkering with that rationale. They have used the criteria of the province to show what should be included in those maps, and we should support our staff's argument so they have the strongest argument possible to have the conversations with the province. That's what I'm asking. I know that Councillor Wong Tam will be putting a friendly amendment. This is in light of the discussions that we had at committee to be more protective of hotel replacement and culture facilities. This is something that we're seeing eroding in our city as well, and I think it is important. I think that we should support it as well. So I ask Council to support staff recommendations, to give them the tools to go up the street and to continue this conversation about land planning and have strong arguments to defend, good planning for the City of Toronto and protect jobs in the City of Toronto.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson to speak.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'll be very brief. I actually just want to rise to thank our amazing planning staff, particularly our Chief Planner, Greg Lintern, as well as Carrie Vomvakis. I know that they worked so hard pulling this together in an incredibly tight timeline that the province set out. And we've got some excellent staff recommendations before us. I think it was a painstaking process that they went through in the last month, doing an analysis of the citywide Toronto's employment lands. So I'm very happy to see staff's recommendations. I fully support them, and we have to really commit to protecting our employment lands. I know, and I think you appreciate as well, that these business parks play such an important role in our city, and quite frankly are one of the keys to our success. And the province's amendment includes a one-time window to allow municipalities to undertake some conversions between the effective date of the amendments and the next MCR. So I'm hearing from businesses, and they're saying to me, do we need to start looking at relocating? We're losing confidence in the municipality and the province, and those two levels of government. Are we going to be protected from, I call it creep, other people call it different things, but they're very concerned. And I'm going to just narrow it down to the Leaside Business Park right now. This is a major industrial park in the heart of Toronto. It has access to the Don Valley Parkway, and it's been around for 50 years, incorporated in the early 80s. So these huge manufacturers employ thousands of Ontarians, and they are literally concerned about whether they need to start relocating outside of Toronto because of the things I've just cited, the lack of confidence in the municipal and provincial government to protect them against the creep. So I hope that we can think very deeply today about use compatibility. It's a mounting, growing problem in the city, and I think city staff have taken the right approach here. They've been very selective about the areas they're recommending for protection, and it's a great opportunity to look comprehensively at employment lands in our city. So again, my thanks to staff. I think this was a monumental task, and they've done an excellent job. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Perks to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm just trying to see if my motion is ready. Yes. Thank you. So what this motion does, Speaker, is take the staff recommendation that we preserve 95% of the land and instead recommends that we preserve 100% of the land. I'm largely in agreement with the comments that have been made by Councillors Bailão and Robinson. The issues here really are whether or not we're going to be able to give people who are employing over 400,000 people in the City of Toronto some assurance that we're not going to allow creep, we're not going to gradually chase employment uses out of the City of Toronto. And the planning reason for that or the planning issue there is more than simply whether or not there are jobs in the City of Toronto. As I'm sure Councillor Bradford will tell you, or anyone in our planning department will tell you, the critical thing when designing a city is to have a mix of uses in relative proximity to each other. We do not want a future where people live in the City of Toronto and work in the 905, and where that's the only option. Retaining jobs here benefits the vibrancy of the city. It benefits the environment in that it means less travel time. It benefits our transit network, and I think that's probably part of why Councillor Robinson spoke out. But I want to talk about why I think it's important to pursue 100% and not 95%. Some of those who've argued that we should do this because we want to go along with the provincial intent, I think, I'm never one to try to understand what goes on inside the mind of the Premier. I find it a dangerous territory and I would get lost. But let's take a look at what we actually got put in front of us. The province gave us a map which said, why not hive off 33% of your lands that are currently protected as employment? I don't need any bigger signal for what the province's intent really was than that. I put the words aside because the province obviously put the words aside when they designed that map. Now, you heard from the General Manager of Economic Development, our expert on what the economic consequences of this council's decision would be. If we did what the province, looking at the prima facie evidence, wanted us to do, we would enrich property developers by billions or tens of billions of dollars, and simultaneously sacrifice good land use planning, good balance between employment uses and residential uses, the opportunity to have an efficient transportation network where trips to work were relatively short and focused and within the city. We would be undermining the things that make Toronto as good as it is now and foreclosing the opportunity to make it better in exchange for certain private landowners making billions or tens of billions of dollars. I don't need any other signal for what the province's intent is than those two facts. Now, am I just arguing about 5%? No. I'm arguing also about the integrity of this council's work in setting the land use future for the City of Toronto. As you heard from the Chief Planner, we had no compelling reason to review these 5% of lands until the province decided to bring something forward that had the potential to enrich private landowners by billions or tens of billions of dollars. And there is a possibility that those lands would be converted anyway. Every 5 years, the owners of those lands have the right to bring their case to us to look at other uses. It's already built in. Where's the urgency? Where's the urgency? I'll tell you what the urgency is. The urgency is just exactly the same thing we saw on the provincial effort to try to take away some of the protected areas in the Greenbelt. It's to enrich private landowners. Tell them no. Tell them no, thank you very much. Our position as a Toronto City Council is that the land use functions in the City of Toronto, the environment in the City of Toronto, the relationship between employment and residential in the City of Toronto and jobs in the City of Toronto are more important to us than the wealth of private landowners.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate the fact of the work that we're doing. And as we're moving forward, that we have to make sure that not only do we make sure that the employment lands stay employment, but we will allow uses on those employment lands that create employment. And I'll give you an example. There's an area in my part of the world that a daycare wants to go to in a senior's home. The senior's home is in an industrial land and has been grandfathered. However, the daycare that we need it's a subsidized daycare from the city cannot go into the same building and have a daycare, and I know that the planning staff is opposing to it, but we need to take a look into that situation. We allow other usages. We allow it in the same building. If we want to, the city has approached the landlord and says, can we have it as a, can we bring homeless individuals for them to stay in the building, and we're looking at that. However, when it comes to the daycare situation, which is a subsidized daycare, which is needed in my ward, we're moving negative on that one. So we need to make sure that although we preserve the employment lands, that we make some adjustments to the other venues that will also create jobs, and a daycare center does create that. I want to thank the Chief Planner, Mr. Linter, for reassuring me that the area in my ward, especially Global Fortune and Steeles and Kennedy, will be put on the map when it goes forward to the province, and I'm looking for him to do just that. And I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, I think that the changes that are being proposed to the growth plan, they're very wide-ranging and frankly quite concerning in the context of Bill 66 as well. So we're seeing the government, in many respects, sort of eroding the legislation that's actually meant to protect our physical and natural environments. So changes here are being done in the means of producing a more efficient process. I think that can be a positive thing, but we're doing that through initiatives and processes like our end-to-end review. From my perspective, the way to actually improve our planning system is for the provincial government to come to the table with investment and meaningful regional planning. The item that stands out in all of this the most, of course, is the proposed changes that would be converting those employment lands and make staff's work more difficult to complete the MCR here. So if the province is going ahead with these changes, we will be losing a third of our employment lands, and they would be open to conversion before the next municipal comprehensive review. That's the real problem here. Now, Chief Planner's supplementary report asks us to request the province to make 95% of the employment lands provincially significant employment lands. That's an important step. Now, I asked the questions about 95 or 100 or 110% because I wanted to understand how we got there. And as we heard, we arrived at that number through the provincial criteria to ratchet up the numbers that we can actually protect before the next MCR. I think after they adopt the growth plan amendment, we will be embarking on that OP conformity exercise, and we'll have another opportunity to protect jobs on those 5%. So based on listening to the comments from the staff here and the staff recommendations, that's what I will be supporting. We've fought hard to protect employment lands in Toronto. We need to continue to do that. The staff recommendations that we have in front of us are what we should be supporting here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion I would ask the clerk to put on the screen for me, please. And that is simply to amend recommendation number 6A by adding the words "including hotels" after the words "employment uses." And you can now see that on the screen. Madam Speaker, this is let me begin also by just also acknowledging the hard work of staff. Carrie and Jeffrey, as well as Greg, I know you all worked really hard. I know this particular item that was dropped on your desk caused a lot of stress as you tried to respond as intelligently as you could and strategically as you could to what was unannounced. No consultation with the city. This was another one of those fastballs that was thrown, and if you were not over the plate, it would have resulted in something different. So thank you. This is really a conversation, and I think the conversation about who's going to plan the city, and for whose interests will this city be planned. I asked a simple question about, has this ever been done before? And this meaning, has the province ever introduced provincially sensitive employment zones? And the answer was no. Has there ever been any type of interference in such a way in municipal matters where you actually have a provincial government putting together a map, drilling all the way down to the granular neighborhood level and saying that area, and that area, we're going to give the opportunity for the property owner to rezone and override what the city's intentions are, or even the city's planning processes. That is just behavior that is motivated by external forces. And this is why Councillor Perks' motion is so critical. We already have a process at the City of Toronto. Our planning staff are professionals that win awards around the country. We do extraordinary visionary document planning at the city. And we do this with broad consultation, open and transparent for all to see. That's how we plan and build a city. And we have not necessarily needed the provincial government to come in and tell us, I want you to change everything. Now, the enriching of property owners, sure, yes, that may happen through rezoning. But what I really don't like about what is transpiring here is how it's happening exclusively in the City of Toronto. A provincial government drilling down, mapping, cherry-picking the sites that they want to change. That is odd behavior. The 95-100 question is also at the core of who we are and how we respond to this. Since we already have a planning process that is open and transparent, and there are already appeal processes that are available to landowners, let that run its course. We don't necessarily need to even cherry pick out the 5% so that we can actually take another look at it. When we have the municipal comprehensive review, that will be open and underway again very shortly. There is absolutely no need to move to 95% when we should actually be standing firm with the 100%. And I recognize that there are probably conversations that have taken place even on the second floor with particular landowners and perhaps municipal lobbyist lawyers. I really encourage councillors, especially those who are new to City Hall, I really encourage you to think about the kind of city that you are building and recognize that you're new in this chamber, and people are watching what you are doing and what you're saying, and you don't have to be somebody else's person. You can be your own person and vote with your values, and especially if you have been paying close attention to land use planning matters in Toronto and recognize the incredible lobbyists and corporation forces that exist behind the chambers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know, Madam Speaker, the order in which the items will be voted on. It would be my intention to support the 100%. Sorry, I'm having trouble. If you could stop my clock. Yeah, thanks. It's my intention to support the 100% if it's voted on first, but I appreciate staff's recommendations. I have full confidence in our ability to conduct an MCR, because the last time we did one, we did a good job of protecting our lands. We've demonstrated our ability to look rationally at employment across our map, and we've caused employment growth as a result. My questions were about what are we taking with us in our presentation. Are we taking with us the map that shows how much potential there still is within 500 meters of every transit station? 500 meters is what we've been functioning with, and we still have a long way to go. We've only realized 50% of the potential within those zones, and even that is somewhat hard for the surrounding communities to bear, and so we're proceeding apace, but with due consideration to its impact on those neighbourhoods. I think the reason the deadline is what it is, the reason we are being asked within little more than a month to have our final proposal for changes in, is so that there wasn't time for us to get out to our communities and show them a map of what it would mean to expand 500 meters to 800 meters, what the neighbourhoods are that would be affected, how it radically changes our own official plan policies and our abilities to be sensitive when enacting them and realizing our own vision. They don't want us to show the impact and the map and the areas that will be affected by 800 meters. People barely know about it. It's my intention to make sure that I have the maps that staff have created, and that at every community development meeting that I'm involved in, I show those maps to say to residents, do you realize that this is the proposal of your local MPP? That's right. That he wants to destroy every neighbourhood along every subway station in Don Valley North. That's what I'll be doing going forward. Every station save one on the Shepherd line has a proposal that destroys every neighbourhood around every station, and no one knows about it. That's what this deadline is about. So we should applaud our staff that they have been able to act this quickly to prepare the response that they presented today. But I really think that because of the underhand way in which this has come to us, with a ridiculous deadline, that we should present as strongly as possible. We should say, we want to protect 100%. We fully intend to embark on our next MCR, and we're happy to look at things for you. But in the meantime, We'd like to protect our employment, and we'd like to protect the neighbourhoods around transit, because 500 meters is enough, and no transit line works unless there are people going in both directions, because there is both employment and residential all along that line. That's how you create real ridership that lasts all through the weekend, lasts through the peaks, and actually loads lines. And we're very good at planning that. So they should be leaving us to do it. But in the meantime, we need to send as strong a message as possible that we've done a good job of bringing our employment lands back, reducing commercial and industrial taxes to make sure that the ratio actually keeps them in the City of Toronto so that we get as many people employed. And we need to continue on with that strategy, and they ought to be supporting it because it's good for Ontario. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Councillor Fletcher to speak.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm very glad that we had the chance to review this between the committee and council, and that staff have come back indicating that there are so many more parts of our employment lands that can receive protection based on the criteria that was set by the province. I just want to echo the remarks of a number of people. I'm actually happy that Councillor Wong-Tam put the hotels in there, because we've had such a difficult time with them being converted, and they're economically very important. So I want to thank the planning staff for their work, but I also have to thank the economic development staff for their vigilance, their constant reminder of how important these lands are for jobs, that they drive jobs in the City of Toronto. And through our many discussions and even going to the OMB to protect the employment district that the city set aside in the Eastern Avenue area, the notion that there are only a certain number of lands, and now we learn it's only 16% of the entire land mass in the city that's set aside to guarantee jobs for Torontonians. And in employment areas, I think we all know that the jobs that are there, they aren't convenience store jobs, they're not a dry cleaning job, they're not a greeter job, they are value-added jobs. Our employment lands are there to have businesses locate there that add value to the economy through the good jobs nature of these employment lands. So we have lands that are zoned specifically for that. We have to be careful. This is the future of work, and we added office. I think we need to be very thoughtful. We added office into our employment lands in certain areas, and that was a discussion with planning and economic development, that is in the new century where so many jobs are going, and it was a wise thing to do. So at the Unilever site, which is a 40-acre site owned by First Gulf, there will be a soap factory opening up hopefully in 2 years with 4,000 jobs on that site. 4,000 good jobs. 4,000. And that's because we made that area at the OMB, when we fought that said we are not going to have incursions from big box retail, residential. This is for jobs. And with the adding of office onto that, it's made it very important. Now, I don't think that downtown Toronto is technically an employment zone, core employment, but it is zoned in a way that all of the job zone in which we're sitting, my friends, right now, the massive number of jobs on Bay Street, on King Street, on Queen Street, that needs to be protected as well. So I do just want to say one of the most difficult things for the public to understand, even in a development application, is why on this piece of land can't we just add some residential? Wouldn't that be nice? We want mixed use. We don't want just these 4,000 jobs at the soap factory, which will also have a smart track station there and eventually a relief line station. Those residents want mixed use. So understanding the importance of zoning and what happens when you start to carve in to the employment lands and allow residential is something that I think both departments, economic development and planning have to be very clear on. Every single planner needs to be clear. It's not just not a bad idea, it undermines the integrity of being able to maintain that as a job zone, because the second that land sells for residential price, everybody else is going to want that exact same price. Jobs gone, housing there, certain number of jobs to build it. But at the end of the day, that's not sustainable. You all know that we subsidize all the residential building in the city with the cost to maintain those and the income that we get. Whereas employment lands, they give us a tax base that punches way, way, way above their weight. So I'm very happy that we're having this debate, and I would, whoever echoed that it would be 100% vote, I hope that will happen.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to thank the amazing team and the planning team, the economic development team in responding to this issue. I don't know what the motivations are in terms of the decision from the province. One can surmise. However, I do think that we actually have a system that's actually working now, and we're looking at fixing it. It doesn't seem to me that we need to fix it, quite frankly. What we need to do is to support it and ensure that it's enhanced. We have, for a very long period of time, seen the pressures and the impact with respect to the employment lands in this city. I think all of us can actually speak to specific issues in their own respective wards where these pressures are having these impact and so on. Councillor Fletcher and others have talked about mixed use, and those are ideally some of the things that we want to encourage and so on. We actually don't want the City of Toronto to become the bedroom community for this region. Quite frankly, we want to have the jobs here, we want to have the opportunities here, we want to ensure that people can come, work, and play. In my own area specifically, we've been dealing with pressures at Birchmount and Eglinton along Birchmount Road. Yesterday I had discussions with a building owner who finally said, Councillor Thompson, you know, you're right, you were trying to ensure that we didn't force this issue. He now has a 20-year lease on this particular property to create major opportunities and jobs in the community. But a number of years ago, he wanted simply to, you know, rezone and to put residential. Good for you, and so we had this discussion yesterday, and we said to him, see, this is what we were trying to do. We want to save the employment lands and so on. And there are many more along transit corridor and so on. We want to create this balance of interest to ensure that we can protect the opportunities for residents. We have a motion about GM, for example, wanting to make sure that we recognize the impact when companies close down and move out, the pressures that it causes on our community and the families, the disruption that it causes and so on. So I think we all have an obligation, and as I said, I don't know what the motivations are with respect to the province. We can surmise what those particular motivations may or may not be, but I simply want to deal with what we actually have here, in that this diligent group of people, as staff members, have worked really hard to respond to maybe what others may thought would have been difficult to respond to, so that perhaps they would have an edge or an advantage. And I think that the addition of the other elements that you're adding to the PES, I think that's extremely important, because when I look at my ward, there's some additional areas that's being added, that's being proposed, and I support that wholeheartedly. We have time and time again in this chamber indicate our interest in protecting the employment lands for the very reasons that many have spoken about already, and that I will just continue to add my voice to. It creates prosperity. It creates opportunity. It minimizes disruptions to our community and so on. It also de-emphasizes the need for our municipality to actually be supporting residents who are not working because they're on social assistance and so on. Because when you remove those jobs, when you create what I believe is extremely an important piece, you send a wrong message. You create this great concern to those who are investing in this community that you don't really care, you don't support their particular interests and so on. We need to stand up and support the business owners who are complaining about the creep that's taking place, and it has been for a long period of time. We finally have a system that works. We have the 5-year review where through the process, naturally you'd come, you'd bring your application, you'd bring your concerns as part of that process, and it's put into the hopper, it's considered. I'm not sure why we want to change the system, but we have to support the recommendations that are here from our diligent staff members. I want to again thank them for the great work that they've done, both the planning, economic development staff, and all involved. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. First of all, I also want to thank the staff of both departments for a really intelligent and quick response. Like Councillor Perks, I would prefer if we were supporting 100%, but we'll go along with the staff recommendations as a practical matter. And like others have said, we're really talking about the future of our city here and who controls it. And you know, I really was listening to Councillor Carroll's comments about how few people know that this is going on, how few people are paying attention, and how easy it is for the province to get away with taking away our control over the future of our city. And just to look at the issues in simple terms, employment not only has a huge impact on the economic vitality of the city, being able to preserve those jobs within the city, but how are we ever going to solve our transportation problems if the jobs are happening outside the city and we're not doing everything we can to have jobs inside the city that in some instances people would be able to walk or bike to, and certainly take public transit to. And you know, we're just going to continue with this reliance on car traffic if we cannot keep the jobs and create the jobs in the city. And on the 800 meters versus the 500 meters, in the area that I represent, we have 3 subway stations. Several years ago, we exceeded the provincially required or the provincially set population targets for 2041. So we are more than 25 years ahead of the provincial population growth target for the area. That's with the 500 meters, and with more developments coming all the time. And you know, they're talking about extending that to 800 meters. It just becomes, you know, really impossible to manage. And we know the results of that overdevelopment. We have children who literally look out the windows of their condos at schools that they cannot attend because there is no room for them, and they're getting on buses. And currently those buses are traveling a couple of kilometers outside of the neighborhood where all the other kids who live in the neighborhood go to school, and those schools are getting filled up. And soon we're going to be busing kids like completely outside of their geographic area. We're going to be busing kids 3, 4, 5 kilometers to find space if we continue this. And the provincial government, meanwhile, and the previous government as well, as much as this one, although the current one seems to be intent on causing us more harm, but you know, we have provincially appointed appeal bodies that keep approving development that nobody wants other than the land speculator who owns the property. We have a school system that the province needs to fund new classroom spaces and doesn't, even though they're creating the situation for that school overcrowding. And we have situations like the Young 401 bottleneck that they're not doing anything to solve, despite pushing all the population on us on the area. So this just makes a bad situation worse, but most of all, takes away our control of our future and takes away our ability to plan for the future and protect neighborhoods in a way that the people who live in the neighborhoods aren't even fully aware of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll begin by saying I'll be supporting the staff recommendations. And we heard the word creep in our debate this morning, questions of staff. Creep has happened. And, you know, why has creep happened? And over the 15 years I've been here, there's been some classic battles on here, on this council floor, about protecting employment lands. And I've spoke to our speaker about, you know, she had a tire company in her ward that's spewing, you know, fumes out to where residents are there. We don't think that way anymore. And as a local councillor, you know, I think Councillor Ajamari, too, had the Sunrise Propane. When things like that happen, you have these obnoxious uses, your residents come to you and say, listen, I want that out of here. And the way that's happened is let the residential come in. So was that right or wrong? But you as the local representative, you get the pressure from the community. That's how the creep has happened. But my line of questioning to staff were the lands that we are controlled, and Councillor Fletcher's got a soap company in 4,000 jobs. But we have now Create TO, but there doesn't seem to be a plan to attract the right type of jobs. It's like, oh, it's employment, whatever comes in there. You know, there's as of right zoning. But the lands that we control, I think there's going to be a better job done of going out there, as Councillor Thompson is taking his team throughout the world, that we, you know, we can tell some of these companies, Google, Amazon, we have 20 acres of land within 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers of the downtown core, and let them know that this land is available. But, you know, the way we do it now, I know it works. It goes to the big real estate agents. They put it up, goes out there, the fax comes to your fax machine, oh, that's available. That's the way it kind of works now. But we don't seem to be on the proactive going out trying to get the right type of jobs. And I know it works because when my company was buying a building, you know, they're not there. They come over by fax, but I think that our economic development team, that the work they're doing, the great work they're doing, traveling throughout the world, letting people know we are on fire here. Let's not take the best thing that when it's in our control. Let's go out and maximize those jobs like we're doing with the Mr. Christie Craft lands that are now taken over by First Capital. And Mr. Williams has been very clear. We want triple the amount of jobs. We want a different type of use here. And I think that's what the local councillors want to see. I know Councillor Nunziata, you've been fighting for revitalization up there. So this is why the creep has happened, because there's obnoxious uses that would never allow. Councillor Layton had the pig slaughter right down Toronto in his. So that's the reason that creep has happened. We get it. We're supporting the staff, but that's why it's happened. And I think we could have a better communication out there of these lands that are available and really put the emphasis on getting good jobs and the number of jobs, like Councillor Fletcher has, 4,000 jobs. That's a great number. That's what we're looking for. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few short points. You know, this week I visited one of the most iconic buildings in Toronto that set a whole new trend, and that's the carpet factory on Mowat Avenue, which was built in 1891. I think it's Councillor Perks riding, I think.
Former, now Councillor Cressy.
Councillor Cressy's area. I hope he's interested in this. But anyways, it's one of the most magnificent buildings in Toronto that if you get a chance to walk through it, it's just smart. But anyways, it's a startup hub. It's a small business startup hub, a high-tech hub. Employs hundreds of people because that building was restored and converted from a carpet factory into a small office space. And the challenge we have now is that, talking to a couple of the proprietors there, long-term proprietors, is that the rents are going up so high, and the cost of everything around there in Liberty Village is so prohibitive. So the cost of a hamburger now used to be $5, now it's about $20 for a hamburger. So a lot of the small startups are thinking of leaving that area, going somewhere else. So somehow economic development, we've got to get a plan together to try and keep and retain these small startups that are down in Liberty Village, and maybe try to encourage them, if they're going to move, maybe move into Councillor Francis Nunziata's area, where there's some great things happening around the Symes refurbishment of the old incinerator there. It's an incredible achievement she did there with that refurbishment of the incinerator. So we've got to try and keep some of the jobs that are here, because they're going to leave. They're going to go to Hamilton or wherever because the cost of doing business is much less there. So that's one challenge. Just in terms of the 500 to 800 meters, I just want to say that this is a premeditated plan as part of the takeover of the TDC. They want to basically take over all. They don't care about the subways or the transit system. They want to control the land and offer the land to developers. So they said the developers will build the subways for free. And how are they going to do it? Well, here's another part of the plan. The 800 meters. So there you can expand this zone where you could increase densities into neighborhoods, as Councillor Carroll said. It's an attack on neighborhoods. You try to protect neighborhoods when it's all of a sudden 500 meters is sometimes challenging around certain stations. But now to go to 800 meters, when they take over the subway, they're going to take over planning rights, total planning control, just like a ministerial order over all the subway stations, so that there'll be incredible density to basically fulfill their promise of saying, we're going to build those subways to Pickering for free for you. So that's what this is really part of, and that's why I'm glad the staff has intervened with some reality here in a short time frame here to expose this. This is part of the plan to basically take away the subway, take away the transit system, take away the land. You can imagine what they're going to do. I was talking to a councillor about Rosedale Station. You can imagine what they would build at Rosedale on Yonge Street. The people in Rosedale, I remember years ago, stopped a 8-story building, 6-story building, and said it was too much. When the takeover of those lands takes, the province takes, imagine what they're going to put at the Rosedale Station, for one example, or Chester Station, wherever you want to go. So anyways, I totally support the staff recommendation of essentially saying we got to protect what we have, but let's also, while we're protecting what we have, and in my area I've got some incredible lands that are part of this. I've got Canada Goose. I've got roots. It's right in this area that they excluded. Said, so can you imagine if we lose the iconic Canada Goose, which basically exports to China. They export clothing to China. What a great success story. 600 people, Councillor Karygiannis, worked there at Canada Goose. I don't think you can afford the coat there, but maybe you can buy. Anyways, there's 600 people. Yeah, right. There's also another operation, the subsidiaries up in Scarborough there. But the main office is right there in Eglinton, Lawrence, in the middle of the city, Ward 8. Okay, so that's where it started, Canada Goose. And we'll give you a little bit of the action there in Scarborough, too. Anyways, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, ready to vote. Okay, motion 3 first by Councillor Perks. It's on the screen. By Councillor Wong Tam. It's on the screen. Recorded vote.
Councillor Wong Tam, please.
The motion carries 24-1.
Okay, motion 2 by Councillor Perks, if we can put it on the screen. Recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
The motion does not carry. The vote is 6 to 19.
Okay, motion 1 by Councillor Bailao as amended. No? Oh, okay. Recorded vote. Oh, okay. Okay.
Councillor Robinson, please.
The motion carries 24 to 1.
Okay, thank you. Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Okay, we're going to do some quick releases. Okay. Yes, we just voted on it. I just said item as amended. Okay, so there were a number of members' motions that were introduced and that were circulated, so we'll go through those and then we'll do quick releases. So, okay, MM 3.12, Councillor Grimes, would you like to move it? $1,037, the Queensway. You want to move it? Okay, all in favor? Carried. MM 3.13. Councillor Coe, you'd like to move it? Am I going too fast for you?
Oh, it's good. Proceed.
Councillor Coe, you'd like to move it?
Yes, I'll so
Okay.
move.
On favor? Carried. No, it's already been introduced. We're voting on it. You want a recorded vote on that? Okay, motion to reopen. Okay, well, I thought we just voted on. Okay, recorded vote on MM 3.13.
Councillor Carroll, thank you. Councillor Perruzza.
The item carries 25 to 1.
Okay, MM 3.14. Mayor Tory, you'd like to move it?
I would, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Okay, on favor? Did you ask for a recorded vote? Okay, recorded vote.
Councillor Cole, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Perks, and Councillor Perruzza, please.
The item carries unanimously, 26 in favor.
Thank you. So if anybody has any quick releases that we haven't completed, if you can put your name up, request to question staff. Oh, okay, we have some motions to add first, okay. Councillor Fillion, you have 2.
Yes, thank you. This is prepared by legal staff. I'm introducing it for them. It's to consider an appeal of a tribunal decision.
Thank you. On favor, carried. You have another one?
Yes. I'm waiting for it to come up. It's, yes, it's a committee of adjustment motion to support city staff position and I believe the committee.
On favor, carried. Councillor Layton?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This is to introduce a motion without notice as it relates to a city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment for 348 Davenport.
On favor, Carried. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you. This is to direct the Medical Officer of Health to report back on implications related to provincial changes. It's urgent as we just received some news today.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Grimes, you have one.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a motion that's urgent because there's an application on this site, and it has the cenotaph from the Branch 3 Legion that honored the dead from the old town of New Toronto. So we'll make sure that's protected.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Bailão. Councillor Bailão. Oh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to introduce the motion to appoint the directors and deputy chief building officials.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Thompson.
Okay. Why is it urgent? Not sure. Thank you, Speaker. This is, I'm not sure why it's urgent, actually. This is a matter to name a facility after Dr. Gordon Chong. I didn't think it was coming to this meeting, but here it is.
On favor? Carried. That's it? Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Speaker. In an extraordinarily rare circumstance, city staff made a mistake in the preparation of a site plan. They've caught the mistake. This corrects it. If we don't correct it now, we have to put the owner back a couple of months. So this is just to fix it.
On favor? Carried. That's it. Okay, any quick releases? If you can put your name out. Councillor Holiday, I know you had one. Okay, Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd be prepared to release NY 3.1.
What page?
Minor amendment regarding the Section 37. If you can put it on the screen. The word vicinity was too vague, so we just threw in there Ward 6.
That's on page 4, NY 3.1. The amendment's on the screen. On favor? Carried. Item as amended. On favor? Carried. Councillor Holiday.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to release MM 3.5, which is reviewing vehicle purchasing practices in solidarity with Oshawa. Thank the staff for answering my questions on the matter.
So you would like to have a recorded vote?
I would, thank you.
Okay, recorded vote on MM 3.5.
Councillor Crawford and Councillor Perruzza, please.
The item carries 22-2.
Do we have any further releases? No? Well, it's 25 after, so we may as well recess for lunch. Thank you.